Bok, dobro jutro, kako ste? Yeah, okay, good. You're awake. I won't attempt any more Croatian anyway, but it's lovely to be here. It's just great to be back. Yeah, I'm Sam Dutton. I'm a developer advocate with the Chrome team based in London. And yeah, last time I was in Dalmatia, I was here with my family and we stayed near here. Does anyone know this place? It's beautiful, beautiful. Paklenica, yeah? Absolutely stunning. If you haven't been there, I recommend going. Anyway, I actually come from sort of here in the south of the mid-north of South Australia. And you can see there's not a lot of green where I come from. I really do come from somewhere that looks like this. Not the house, but you know. Yeah, it's kind of like that. And now I live here, yeah, near SW12 in Tootingbeck in London. And actually, right now, it looks like this. So it's kind of like mid-north South Australia. Anyway, plus ça change. I work here at Google in London in King's Cross. Lots of good stuff going on there, not least like a lot of the Chrome team are there, and in particular people working on Chrome for Android. So a lot of great engineering going on there, and a great area now. So for the last few years, I've been working on something called the Privacy Sandbox initiative, and I'd like to tell you about that today. I also, though, I want to cover, just give you some insight about the feature process. Like, in other words, how stuff goes in the browser from, you know, Canary through to Chrome Stable. So how we get from like just ideas to stuff that, you know, users can actually use. One quick thing, you know, obviously we're all lovers of the web here. This is the Web Summer Camp. But, you know, I would be remiss not to give a shout out to the efforts of our colleagues at Android as well. So, yeah, Privacy Sandbox and Android is introducing new, more private ways of doing advertising without cross-site identifiers. The web and Android efforts share like some of the same, I mean, well, they share the same principles and some of the same kind of engineering concepts. It's worth bearing in mind, of course, that, you know, the web and Android platforms are very different, and different technologies are being developed on Android. Yeah, it's a distinct initiative, but, you know, if you're working with Android apps as well as the web, then you should certainly keep an eye on this. There's lots of documentation about this on privacysandbox.com and also on developer.android.com. I'll share links from this session later on as well. So this talk is kind of going to be in three parts. I want to talk about some of the reasons, you know, behind the Privacy Sandbox. So why Chrome chose to take on this project. And next I'd just like to run through the APIs. So to talk about, you know, not in huge technical detail, but how the APIs work, in specifically what we call the ads APIs. So Fledge, Topics, and Attribution Reporting. These are APIs for providing relevant ads and measuring digital advertising. And lastly, I'm going to talk through the development, like feature lifecycle. You know, how APIs are developed and how, you know, how we engage with industry and other stakeholders, and how, like I say, features get from like just being words on a page to being something that people can use in a browser. So let me start for some reasons, you know, why we need the Privacy Sandbox. I'm sure many of you here are kind of well aware of the backstory here. So you might have heard this word composability, and this is kind of one of the web's, you know, superpowers. Shamelessly stolen some slides from my colleague Rowan, who's at the front here. You might have seen this from Google I/O. So, you know, this is sort of classic web page, like a map from one origin, you know, a script from some other origin, and of course, advertising. You know, whether we like it or not, and whatever the future holds, advertising is a big part of the web right now. It's a source of revenue for many sites, and it drives business to a lot of it's a driver for business on the web in general. And I think, at this point in history, browsers need to support these advertising use cases. So, obviously we've had advertising forever, and we've had different kinds of, relevant advertising. Like this I found these old ads in an old book I've got, and this sign by the highway in the US. It's kind of relevant advertising in that moment. So what we're doing on the web is kind of something similar. So, why is there a problem now? Well, historically, as I'm sure you know, the web's used cookies and other tracking mechanisms to make it possible to deliver relevant ads. And these mechanisms are going away. And that's a huge problem for sites that are relying on ads, relevant ads for revenue, and sites that are using ads to drive their business. Ad selection and conversion measurement and other use cases have relied on cross-site identity, using mechanisms, they just weren't built with web privacy in mind. It's not just cookies, but fingerprinting is used to track behavior across sites. And of course, sites can just request user information, like stuff like email addresses and so on, and just keep identity. You may have seen this picture, like ad ecosystems on the web, which is insane. Not even developers or publishers, advertisers, ad tech platforms even understand the whole kind of supply chain when ads are delivered to a page. It's really complex. So, yeah, when I visit a site, I don't know what third parties are doing with my data. I know something's happening, but I have no real sense of what's going on. And it's not just me. People everywhere are really concerned about privacy. They're increasingly driving choices about what people do on the web. Different people have different ideas of what constitutes privacy, but there is an overarching concern that's increasing. And regulators around the world are, of course, stepping up privacy requirements. And this is a huge deal for the web, and it's happening very quickly. So, given how many businesses rely on advertising for revenue or to generate their business, this is a problem for web platforms and ecosystems. It's not just a problem for tech companies or for advertising platforms. It's a problem for the web platform in general that we need to deal with. But of course, it's great. The web is an open platform. So what that means is we need to get buy-in for anything we do on the web, and any changes we make or any innovations that we're considering. Chrome or any other browser cannot and doesn't want to make decisions unilaterally. Chrome's not just like a product, where we can make decisions in isolation. The web doesn't work like that. So the web was not designed, like I say, for many of the requirements that are kind of core to the way people use the web today, for advertising, fraud detection, identity management, many other use cases. And we need, purpose-built technologies for this kind of privacy-focused web. And that's where the Privacy Sandbox comes in. So Chrome's been working with the web community, industry stakeholders and regulators as well, to develop these new privacy-preserving, technologies that are can support this kind of healthy, sustainable ecosystem. So the Privacy Sandbox is kind of focused on, supporting these digital advertising capabilities that modern sites need. But also, like I say, stuff like fraud detection, identity management, and potentially content, that's customized for a user device. I know that Rowan is actually going to cover a lot more in his talk that comes after this. But of course, one thing we need to do is, once we've developed these new APIs, we need to make sure that sites have time to adapt to them and adopt those technologies, so we can safely phase out support for third-party cookies and other and fingerprinting techniques as well, and can continue this work to kind of mitigate other types of tracking. So the core set of principles for the initiative I'm talking about is this document, which is a potential privacy model for the web. It was developed by privacy experts and computer scientists from Google, with lots of feedback from elsewhere. So the core idea here is to lay out this set of ground rules when we're designing technologies to meet these use cases. And the stuff I've talked about, but all the time while abiding by our changing privacy needs. In particular, the proposal covers this difficult question. This is something Rowan will talk more about, actually, of how to enable connections across sites without compromising privacy. And as you can imagine, this is a hard problem to solve. This is one of the core problems for the web right now, I think. Now, one of the major initiatives of the innovations of the Privacy Sandbox APIs is thinking about ways that we can do stuff in the browser on the user's device. With current technologies, as you know, data is collected, aggregated, and shared with third parties. And like I was saying, normal people, even developers, advertisers, don't know the whole supply chain and how that works for that data. So the idea is that Privacy Sandbox can allow stuff like ad auctions, conversion measurement, other use cases to be done on the user's device. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So with that in mind, I'd like to give you a whistle-stop tour of the actual APIs that I'm talking about, these Privacy Sandbox APIs. We've been really pleased. We've had lots of engagement. This is about the kind of incubation part of the process, since that's obviously the phase of the first part of this initiative. So I'm not going to go deep into this process, but one thing we need to understand, this is an iterative process. We currently have 12 proposals at various stages of development in this process. There are Privacy Sandbox available now 5 technologies that are available for public testing, including the 3 main ads APIs that I'll talk about today: Topics, Fledge, and Attribution Reporting. And here's the public timeline. You can see this at privacysandbox.com. There's lots of milestones here, but the main ones to consider are mid-2023. That's when we expect APIs to be launched in Chrome for general availability, and in H2 2024 when we expect to begin phasing out third-party cookies. So yeah, we're expanding the information channels all the time. We have developer guides, we're doing office hours sessions, we have API email groups, and we're preparing reports for regulators. Of course, there are also W3C meetings, and there is a lot of discussion in issues and other forums on GitHub, which is great, and there's a lot of discussion going on there. So the Privacy Sandbox APIs have a lot of work to do to provide these purpose-built APIs to support this really wide variety of use cases. So I'm going to focus on advertising APIs that are addressed by the Privacy Sandbox. I just wanted to run through just some concepts that are kind of core to this, and really core to understanding the way that ads work on the web. So when we talk about an advertiser in this context, we mean a site that pays to advertise its products, yeah? Example here is like an online shoe store. When you hear about a publisher, this is just simply any site that sells ad space. Of course, advertisers rely on ads to make people aware of their products and services, and obviously to drive business to their sites. Publishers can rely on ads to potentially, show content without charging for the content, or if they have content that they believe they cannot charge for. So advertising can provide revenue to fund that for publishers. Ad tech platforms. You might have heard about supply-side platforms, SSPs, or demand-side platforms, DSPs, and so on. These are really sites that, or services, platforms, that are buying and selling ad space and providing measurement of digital advertising. Relevant ads are more profitable for the sites that publish them. They drive more business to the sites, the advertiser sites, and in all our research, they're less annoying to users. There are different ways to do this. You can, there is not one way to provide relevant ads, and I think one of the core principles behind the Privacy Sandbox is that we're providing signals that can be used in combination with everything else in order to provide ads that work well for businesses and for users. For example, like you have first-party data, like a user may have told a site that they're interested in certain topics. So, you could show them ads that relate to that topic. You have contextual relevance, which is stuff like, put this ad next to articles about trail running or something like that. And then, like, you could have interest-based relevance, which is stuff like, show this ad to users who, in their browsing behavior, showed some interest in trail running. And remarketing, you think of it as stuff like where you've previously had an interaction and with an advertiser, and they want to drive you back to their site. We've all encountered those ads, I'm sure. So the 3 ads APIs I'm going to talk about. So topics and APIs are known as the relevance. The relevance APIs. Topics provides a high-level idea of a user's interest based on their recent browsing history by assigning topics of interest to sites and then recording that in the browser on the user's device. So in other words, the topics of the sites that the user visited that appear to be of interest. Fledge supports more granular remarketing use cases. This is where marketers want to reach audiences who've shown an interest in specific websites or products. But the core thing is, how do we do this in a privacy-preserving way? And lastly, attribution reporting is about providing data about the efficacy, the performance of campaigns. In other words, campaign measurement. But doing this in a way that's anonymized and, again, is going to preserve privacy. We have, at the moment, an origin trial. I'll explain a bit more about what that means later for these 3 Privacy Sandbox APIs. And, you can take part in that. And we've also updated user controls in Chrome as part of that origin trial. So just kind of set expectations. These are proposals. These are under discussion. We're getting feedback. We're in this process of iteration. This is not a final plan. This is very much still under discussion. The proposals are evolving with feedback, community feedback, and the testing that's going on right now during the origin trial. So first up, topics. Like I say, this is an API to enable interest-based advertising without resorting to tracking the sites a user visits by some third party. So here's a very quick overview of how topics works. So first up, sites are mapped we have this public list of topics, about 350 topics, stuff like, pets, fitness, whatever. And the top 10,000 sites are actually manually curated to have topics. And then below that, we have a machine learning model. The model is downloaded to your device in Chrome, and the inference is done locally on the device if you go to a site that's not in the top 10,000 to work out what might be a topic that's relevant to that site, given its host name. I'm conscious that that does not work for every site, but again, you need to think of this as a signal, one signal of many signals that can potentially be used to deliver relevant ads. And then on the user's browser, on their device, they like Chrome will work out the user's top topics for the current week. So in other words, this is the topics that, given their browsing for sites that where the topics API has been enabled, where they're opted into this, that the user appears to show an interest. So this might be running shoes, fitness, whatever. And there'll be like a top 5 topics for each week. And then the user's browser can share, like with an ad tech platform that has a presence on the site the user has visited, a list of the top topics. So there's one for each week chosen from the top 5. There's also a random one as well to improve privacy. So you can get up to 3 topics returned from the API that appear to be of interest for the user for the current week and the 2 weeks before that. And then, of course, advertisers can use that as a signal to help deliver relevant ads. Just a little bit more, like I say, just to reiterate, the top 10,000 sites are curated manually, and then below that we use, on the user's device, a machine learning model. You can actually see that and play with that, and you can see the list of the top 10,000 sites. I'll show you where you can get access to that. So you can actually see that stuff and see how it works. From this page, Chrome Topics Internals, you can see this kind of shows like my browsing history recently, where I'd been to some sites. I don't know if you can see this, but its view is that I'd seen sites about cats and humor and pets, which were like saying this is real. These are actually inferred from the sites I went to. And then 2 random ones which are added to that list. There is this element of randomness with these other 2 topics there. You can also get from this site like information about the features and the parameters that you've set, and you can also look at the classifier. You can use from Chrome Topics Internals. You can list website host names and then see what has been inferred for those sites by the Topics API. So we have lots of resources if you want to find out more about topics. There's an overview, information about how to test and experiment with the API. We have a demo, and then on the far right, there's the actual explainer itself. If you want to comment on the design of the API and feedback on your concerns or use cases you feel it doesn't meet or any kinds of comments there, that's the place to do that. So next up, I'd like to talk about Fledge, which is the API for remarketing and custom audience use cases, but without the need for third-party tracking. I'll go into a little bit more detail with this, like the process running through. I'm going to show some code, but if you're not a coder, don't worry, that won't matter. I want to give more detail here because it is more complicated. It has a more complicated job to do than topics, I think. So here's how Fledge works. So depending on what a person is doing, an ad buyer, so this is a company that wants to have an ad somewhere, can add a user to what's called an interest group. So this kind of corresponds to something like custom audiences or remarketing lists. But the key thing here is that interest group membership is held on the user's device in the browser. It's not held by some third party. Now, at some point, an ad seller will want to initiate an auction. So you imagine you're on a publisher site, like a news website. There's an ad slot. An ad seller might be a sell-side platform, whatever, or the publisher itself. Initiate an ad auction to choose the right ad, the best ad for that slot. Now, with Fledge, that is done on, again, Fledge enables that to be done on the user's device. There's discussion about where that can happen and what the most secure way and most performant way to do that is, but there is this opportunity to do that on the user's device, rather than this, third-party chain again that I talked about, where we have no real sense of where that auction is happening or who's sharing the data. And then lastly, once the ad has been displayed, the browser can then send like post-auction reporting to endpoints that are supplied by the ad sellers and the ad buyers, or the ad seller and the ad buyers. Let's just go through this step by step. So the user visits a website. I'm going to show some code, but don't worry too much if you're not a coder. So imagine this user visits a website and does some browsing. So the browser can be asked by an ad tech platform to join an interest group. That might be something like, trail running shoes. This user appears to have this interest in trail running shoes. So there's this config that's set, like you can see here, trail running shoes is the name of this interest group, and it's being set by this ad tech platform up here. And then we call this method using that config, and the second parameter there is just setting the duration, how long that interest group would last. Now imagine the same user visits a publisher site. This site publishes ads. So it's a news website. The publisher site or the ad tech platform that works for it runs an auction. And the auction, like I say, can be run on the user's device, or however that is done is within the constraints of the Fledge API. It won't be farmed out to third-party ad tech platforms or wherever. And the auction can then, of course, select the most appropriate ad given the user's interest groups and other factors potentially as well. This is how this works, the config for that. You can see this is the ad seller up here, a bunch of other information there. We run this with the JavaScript method, run ad auction using that config, and then the winning ad is displayed in what's called a fenced frame. And the nice thing about this is fenced frames with Fledge can only be used to display an ad. Like, they can't do anything else on the page. They have no access to the DOM or anything else. So this is a secure way to display ads. I won't talk about fenced frames, but this is a kind of crucial part of the process. So the seller and the winning buyer, like I say, have an opportunity to perform logging of and reporting of what happened with that using the report result method. And if all goes well, we might get a click or at least a view on an ad, and that takes us then to the Attribution Reporting API, which is the next part of the process. So just briefly, what is one of these interest groups that I keep talking about? So it's a group, think of just a group of people that might correspond to something like a remarketing list. Yeah.
The publisher and advertiser can they control the algorithm that decides what ads are shown? For example, a price feed.
Yeah, exactly. So the publisher has, or their, the ad tech platform they're using has control over what the parameters are for that ad auction. And there's a lot of detail in that. I just brushed over the config for that.
Can that be manipulated somehow?
You mean in a nefarious way?
Yeah.
Well, no, because they
control.
Yeah.
Control the parameters. Most probably they can manipulate the results.
Well, what they'll be using that ad auction for is to select a relevant ad. So if you think of a publisher will be using, it'll be either running the auction itself or be using, more likely its sell-side platform to select ads. So it's in the publisher's interest to get a relevant ad. They have to have a trusted relationship with any ad tech platform they're using. So, obviously there has to be this element of trust there. But again, the data, the data about the user's interest groups is held in the browser. That's the core part of this. So however they manage the auction, whatever the parameters are for choosing the ad, that information doesn't get leaked. Yeah. I don't know if that answers your question. Yeah. I meant to say, if you have questions along the way, please do stop me while I'm monologuing up here. Anyway, so I mean, this interest group, yeah, it's this idea of a group of people with common interest who, have already visited and advertised a site. Potentially, you can imagine publishers having interest groups as well, actually. Anyway, I won't go into that here. So every interest group has this owner. In other words, these owners are likely to be advertisers, or rather the ad tech platforms that work for them, like a demand-side platform, a DSP, you might have heard the abbreviation, aiming to buy ad inventory, ad slots for in an ad auction. So an auction, like I say, is this small JavaScript program, and that's where the ad auction is run, rather than what we have now, which is this kind of wherever it's run, but on some third-party service. And yeah, if you want to find out more about this, we have quite a lot of resources. Kind of a general overview, it's less technical, and then a very detailed kind of developer guide, like an API guide, and then the specification itself, the explainer, is again the place if you want to comment on the architecture or the design of this in general. We have a couple of demos for this, which are actually, if you're thinking of building your own implementation, are not a bad place to start. And then, like I mentioned, the last part of this process is attribution reporting. This makes it possible to measure when there's a click or a view of an ad, and when that leads to a conversion, so something like a purchase or a product view on an advertiser site. But the key part of this, again, is it's designed so that it can't be used by third parties to monitor browsing activity across sites. So the way things work at the moment, roughly speaking, is that it's built on this kind of per user cross-site identity, and using whether it's third-party cookies or other identifiers. The ID for a user may be sourced from the browser, by third parties, is then used to match with cross-site data, and then data about what the user does is aggregated and then used to measure advertising efficacy. Now, with the Privacy Sandbox, we need to meet these use cases of measuring ad efficacy. This is a huge deal for whether ads work or not on the web, is being able to understand how well they performed. Are they actually doing their job? So the Attribution Reporting API does this by moving the work of recording and matching events and reporting these, like with these conversion events, moving that to the user's browser on the local device. So let's just go through that step by step. So the first part of this is that a publisher website can configure ads with this special attribute, attribution source, which means that when a user interacts with that ad, the browser keeps a record of that interaction on the user's device. And then later on, if the user engages with whatever, the advertiser's site, the browser can record that event as well. So now we have the act of, say, clicking on an ad, and then an action here, which is some kind of conversion on an advertiser site. And then those two events are correlated, and then we can have what are called aggregatable reports, which give you detailed like conversion site information, stuff like purchase values, geographical location, and so on. Or you can have what are called event level reports. So again, like conversion information, like stuff like a purchase or a product page visit. But there are, I won't go into the details here, but there are stringent mechanisms within this to make sure we keep to user anonymity, and there are a bunch of privacy mechanisms within that process to ensure that we have anonymized data only, and using techniques like noising and so on, just to make sure that it's only possible to get these anonymized campaign reports. And yeah, like I say, you can get from that these two types of reports. If you want to find out more, there's really great content from our colleague Morden Alpus on developer.chrome.com. There are a bunch of things there, including demos and so on. So, like I said, I really wanted to talk a bit more about the feature lifecycle. You know, how these features go from being just ideas on a page to actually being available on web platforms. So I want to go through this step by step. So yeah, you can imagine, like, you know, if you were thinking up some idea for the web, you'd like draft this proposal, publish an explainer, you know, you'd build test versions, and then, you know, great, you'd get it implemented in Chrome Stable, which would be fantastic. Of course, what's missing from that is that every step of the way, there's this constant feedback process. And you know, that's what we have at every step of the way when we're developing new features. So let's go through that. So the start of this is this idea of incubation process. And this is where the very beginnings of an idea that might become a feature on the web are started. And this is the actual start of this for the Topics API. This is a Google Doc that we're working on in Chrome, and you know, there was a lot of work before it got to this stage, believe me. But you know, lots and lots and lots of comments and questions and feedback, or even at this stage when it's just a draft proposal in a document. Now, once we get to a point where we're pretty confident that this is ready for public consumption, then it's published to GitHub, like the example here. So that Google Doc becomes a proposal on GitHub, and that's now open for public comment at that point. And you can see immediately we start to get people posting issues. You know, this is where the interaction really begins. Yeah, so this is an example, like one of the first questions, typical question, an issue that's posted on GitHub. So, you know, if you have comments about these proposals, that's the place to do it, like raising issues on GitHub with the proposal explainer. You might have noticed for this, the bit at the top that says the, where is it? PATCG, yeah? This is the Privacy Advertising Technology Community Group, and that's where this proposal has been published, and that's part of the W3C. The W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, is the standards body for the web, started by Tim Berners-Lee. You know, it's this consortium with engagement from lots of companies, including Chrome and Google. So they have monthly meetings to discuss progress with API proposals. Again, anyone can join these community groups. So if you have an interest in these areas of business or these specific APIs, that's the place to go with that. And this is, you know, a really good place again, to think about industry discussion about API design and what the use cases up there. So the next stage is when we actually begin to prototype and test. You know, when we go from words on a page to actual code running in a browser. So the first part of this is, you might have heard it, this is the Blink Dev mailing list. So what happens is that we have what's called an intent to prototype, and that's posted on this list, and that means we want to start playing around with this in Chromium. Chromium is the open source browser on which Chrome and some other browsers are based. So we post this intent to do that, and then when there's agreement for that, work can begin on putting that code into Chromium. Now, at this point, you will get a bunch of API announcements. We have groups for each of the APIs, so that if you're interested in these things, you can like keep on top of any changes, any new stuff that's happening with those APIs. We also have lots of feedback mechanisms that we have provided here, and we can, yeah, we'll share links to this after the presentation. Other ways you can feedback on these proposals. So, just to be clear, you know, the initial phase of testing we don't just shove all this stuff into the Chrome browser. We have this staged process where we go through what are called release channels. So we have Chrome Canary and Chrome Dev and Chrome Beta. And the idea of this is that very new features will go into Chrome Canary for testing. Chrome Canary is updated every day, and which is great because when there are bugs, and there will be bugs, we can update very quickly, within Chrome Canary, without, of course, that affecting a lot of users. And once a feature gets through like a lot of rigorous testing and utility testing and so on, it can go through to Chrome Dev and then Chrome Beta, and then finally to Chrome Stable. Now, of course, we don't just release features all at once to all users, so that would be really risky. You might have heard this kind of phrase, the APIs rolled out to a percentage of users. Well, this is really crucial, like where we can do this, like try out a feature with a small proportion of users to check if there are problems, things we hadn't thought of. The mechanism to do this is called Chrome variations. You might also have heard of this referred to as field trials or Chrome Finch, which is our internal code name. This is a really powerful mechanism because it makes it possible to roll out changes or new features to a subset of users. And you can imagine that that's extremely useful for trying stuff out when we're introducing changes to the browser to, potentially to billions of users. And of course, we test stuff rigorously before release. Of course, once a feature is released in Chrome Stable, its usage is very, very different. However rigorously we test features, it's just incredibly difficult to predict the knock-on effects, the combination effects of features once they're used by real people, like billions of real people in a stable browser. So we need these mechanisms to be able to get features into the stable browser, but in a phased way, and that's where Chrome variations is really, really powerful. If you want to find out more, I made a video about it, which is kind of non-technical, but runs through the details a bit more. Of course, we also have this thing you might have heard, like testing behind a flag. This is a kind of different mechanism. The way this works is that you can test features by setting Chrome flags or command line flags. Now you can see here that I've gone to Chrome flags and I've set the Privacy Sandbox APIs, the stuff I've been talking about, to enabled, which means that now those APIs, which are normally not available in the browser, will be available for my browser, for one user, for testing with one user. You can also do this, it's a bit hard to read here, but from the command line, running Chrome from the command line. And you can set much more fine-grained control using flags in this way. You can see here that I've changed the time period for testing Fledge to 15 seconds rather than 1 week, so I can test stuff out in the browser. Now, okay, so at this point in the feature lifecycle, we have an experimental version of a new API running in Chrome with individual developers, trying out that, by setting flags. And of course, once we get to that point, we have real developers using this new feature, we're liable to get a lot of feedback. Now, if there's something wrong with the implementation in Chrome, at this point, well, we need to have that reported as a bug on the Chromium bug tracker. Here's a recent example. I found a bug with the Topics API. I reported it, and actually there was this straightforward fix that was immediately incorporated in Chrome. So if you're reporting bugs with an implementation of a feature in Chrome, that's the URL for that, crbug.com/new. If you have like I say, comments on the API design, then post an issue on the proposal on GitHub. So yeah, crbug.com new for bugs, stuff that seems to be broken in the implementation, issues on the proposal if you have comments on the design. Yeah, speaking of which, like I say, we have lots of demos. These, of course, are built for techies, not for consumers, but they're a great way for us to find bugs. Now, the next stage of testing when we're implementing new features is to take a feature to what's called an origin trial. This is where we get into kind of small-scale testing, but potentially with real users. For those who haven't heard of origin trials, they're a way to test new experimental web platform features. Developers can register for an origin trial. It's really quick and easy. You register for an origin trial, you get what's called a trial token. It's just a length of characters. You put that trial token on a web page where you want a feature to be supported, and then when Chrome opens that page, it looks for a token. It looks for tokens. If it finds tokens, it decodes them and then enables the feature for that token. If the token is valid, it's not expired, and so on. And that makes, you can imagine, it really easy for companies to add. They can add tokens to some of their web pages, and for some of their users, a feature that they want to test out will be enabled. With this, again, we have another intent, which is an intent to experiment, which means we want to run an origin trial, another part of this feature process. And then we get a registration page like this. This is the one for the Privacy Sandbox trials. You register, you immediately get your token from that page, and then you can put that token on your pages, in a meta tag or with a header or with like JavaScript, whatever makes sense for you. And we have this concept also, I won't go into the details, but of third-party tokens, where you can say you're using your services on other people's sites, where they want to use your service. You can provide a token within your JavaScript or your iframe or whatever, and then be able to use a feature on other sites that have agreed to use your services. So you don't have to go make some agreement with 150 sites to, can you include a trial token, and so on. You can have it within your own code running on their site. So at the moment we have Privacy Sandbox, an origin trial that's running for 50% of Canary Dev and beta users and 1% of stable users. This is quite an unusual trial, actually. The default is for trials to be available for all users on pages that have a valid trial token. But for this one, it's being used in combination with Chrome variations that I talked about to only give access to 50% for Canary Dev and beta and only 1% at the moment for stable users. And that will be ramped up. And of course, the end goal of this is to ramp up to all users, but it's this staged approach where we can test, where developers and sites and businesses can test safely. If you want to learn more about origin trials, that's the place to go. There's lots more information there about how they work. Again, I've made a video about it, which gives a kind of overview there. Relatively non-technical, but goes into a little more detail about how origin trials work. And yeah, this is where we are, really. To sum up, we've had this period of technical testing with very, very limited traffic. We're now at this point of what we call utility testing. So we have a small percentage of Chrome traffic with real users, and there is this whole process of testing and feedback and tweaks to the APIs happening at that point. And when we're really sure that that the APIs are in good shape, that they're meeting the use cases, then we can move to general availability and run out features by default to all users on Chrome Stable. So as you can see, this is an iterative and a really careful approach to getting features from this kind of idea on a page to being in the browser. Yes.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No.
How do you determine the schedule for ramping up the, like for 1% unstable? Do you always follow the same pattern, like 1%, 10 to 25 to 50?
It depends. We were just talking about this actually, how best to do this. It depends on the feature. It depends on how complex the feature is, and how confident we are about potential unknown side effects and so on. So, I mean, the short answer is it depends. Yeah. But it's always a gradual process. We actually also have this thing called holdback trials, which is pretty cool, where we have a field trial where something is held back for a group of users rather than the other way around. So we've done this with like the photo picker. We actually held back a very small percentage of users from having access to that feature because we really wanted to check whether our fantastic new photo picker was actually, it seemed to be fine, but we wanted to check like if it was working as intended. And we got some interesting data from that. What we learned from that was that actually the changes that had been made by sites to their code had actually meant that the process was working much better anyway. So yeah, there are different ways of using these Chrome variations, these trial groups for turning stuff on, turning stuff off. So that's it from me. Thanks so much for being here. Like I say, I'll share the URLs after the event, but you can find loads of the stuff we've talked about from our Privacy Sandbox homepage on developers.google.com, chrome.com, and on privacysandbox.com. This has like FAQs, more information about cross-platform efforts. Hvala, thank you for having me. I'm like obviously really looking forward to meeting more people in person, talking about what you're working on, what we can do to do a better job of this. I thoroughly recommend the next session, which is from Rowan. It's going to be a great talk. He's going to be talking about privacy, cookies, the future of web platform in general. I strongly recommend checking out that talk. We'll be here, Rowan and I will be here today and part of tomorrow. So please, please come and talk to us.
All right, thank you very much. I see already we have the first question. I would just say, in all fairness, that Rowan's talk is next door. Stay here as well. That was one featured ad. I'll make the other featured ad is Simon Jones is speaking here actually about W3C work. So that's interesting too, redesign.
You have to get it paid.
So if you can't be in both places, if you're not here with a colleague, you can also, I think, catch Rowan later. But let's hear the first question here, if you don't mind just starting by introducing yourself.
Hi, I'm Jim.
Hi, Jim.
Thanks for the talk. Do you think that any governments around the world will start to outlaw the practice of recording and selling user behavior?
Yeah, what's the official view from Google?
So what we do know is that regulation is increasingly prevalent in lots of different regions. As you know, we have EU restrictions and regulation. We have from California, India, and now Australia with the new government there. They're looking into that. The question of where that's going to go is, I think, is very hard to predict. I think one thing I would say, honestly, I would say that one thing we've done is, like with working with the Competition and Markets Authority in the UK, is that we've learned a lot about like how we work and our processes, and in many ways I'd say that's been a learning process for that. It's not all about constraints and restrictions. It's like what we're trying to do here is make things work better for users. That's the whole point of this. We don't, to me, we need, at the moment, the way the web is, we need advertising, whatever the future holds. But we need to do that in a way that, is going to meet those expectations. And we can work with governments. We should. I mean, that's... No, but it's a good question. It's a tough one. Yeah.
All right, there's one here
No,
in one of the first rows. I don't know who you are. Perhaps you can introduce yourself.
So Rowan, also from Google. I just want to add like a tiny bit to that. I think whatever governments are going to do is obviously beyond us, or like Sam and me. I think other people have more insight. But there's this aspect of, I think what Sam was showing in that presentation as well is right now, as if you own a site or you own a business, it's very hard for you or a user to understand what data is being tracked, where is that going, what's happening with it, how does it affect the outcome of what you're seeing. And a lot of the changes we're making with the APIs are sort of moving from this uncontrolled, everything can be collected passively or fingerprinted, and move to these much more kind of active, enumerated surfaces, so that you're in a much better position to say, actually, I need this data, I know exactly where it's going to stay, and I can show that it's not like leaking out, or including some third party doesn't open me up to some risk that I wasn't aware of.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I mean, you know, of course, one of the core features of these APIs, like you say, is it makes things, you know, you think about, you know, what you might think of as privacy risk, as something I've referred to as data debt, you know, where you wind up with a bunch of data, you don't know, like you've collected data, you don't know where it is, you don't know what the legal ramifications are. You know, the aim, one of the core aims of Privacy Sandbox is to reduce that risk and reduce that level of data. And whatever government regulation comes in the future, we hope you're in a better position.
All right, we have one over here. Just hold on a second.
Hello, my name is Filip. I'm from VB Polska, and I'm actually interested to know if you have any mechanism to stop the user from like hijacking this API, like for like ad block purposes or other things maybe. Like right now I cannot see how this is like possible to stop, basically.
Yeah, so I mean, the APIs that we're working on aren't there to, you know, working with ad blockers, or we're not trying to, you know, defeat ad blockers. That's not part of the core design principles here.
It seems like it's going to be way easier when this is rolled out.
I mean, I don't see that there's going to be a significant difference in whether ads can be blocked by some means. The only thing I would say is that we're working, like I say here, with fenced frames where there is no interaction with the surrounding page. So that's like this inert container for presenting ads. So I'd say that's going to potentially have an effect there. But yeah, I mean, also, like, we're not, it's certainly not an aim to make it more difficult for users to not have ads displayed if that's their choice.
All right, I think that's pretty much all we had, just so that we get the break too. I think a break is really important. Perhaps on your question, we had a conversation yesterday around whether you treat this as compliance, you know, tick the boxes, I'm just, you know, doing what the law tells me to do, or if you think about this in a different way. And so that might be input also to the general conversation, you know, is this more about trust, you know, building a trustful relationship with your customers, or are you just doing the bare minimum to meet the legal requirements that might be changing at some point in the future? And I think building on trust might be the better route. But like I said, you know, this was an explanation about the work you're doing on the Privacy Sandbox, which I thought was super interesting. If you liked it too, please get up and then let's give him a standing ovation.